This conference will now be recorded.
Now you want me to call it to order? We call this meeting to order. I have a motion.
Motion to adjourn pursuant to Article 31.66C of the Appleton City Code.
A second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Danielle just got, I think you don't need to repeat parts of it that happened. So that's part of the record. Okay, I'm just going to start out with a brief opening statement, gentlemen, and you've probably seen enough TV. All this is a short snapshot of what we intend to do. Okay? And when we get to the evidence, I'll let you know we're calling Warren to start. But as an opening statement, I think we share a fundamental goal. I'm positive about that. You want what's the very best for them. No doubt about that. Say what you want. Okay. The problems that develop, Warren and I understand that in recent months has been very unpleasant for David and especially all of them. We think some of the stuff that's happening in the press and social media is over the top. And shouldn't be really dislike this happening to the community. But we want to make a presentation tonight and emphasis. And bear in mind that Warren, too, has plenty of things going on. He's not being paid. It's hospital. He wants to stay on. Think about how easy it would have been for him to just find out here. But he didn't. So why is he putting himself in this? Because he cares that deeply about the life of the hospital, of the nursing home, of Appleton, of the clinic. Now, we are respectfully asking, because by appearances last time on May 3rd, it sure seemed to us that some or all of you were just ready to go ahead and give him everyone the vote. We hope not. We're respectfully asking you all tonight to take a deep breath, open your minds, honestly do a reassessment of this situation for the sake of the hospital. Now, what I believe, in my opinion, is that you've been misled on the best approach to preserving our healthcare system. Now, this is a continuation of the May 3rd hearing. You heard a lot of local citizens that night, including 2 prior successful CEOs of AD. Our county commissioner, Gary Hendricks, decades-long experienced nurses like Ms. Meyer, and the Hospital Foundation, Dan, all spoke in support of Warren Rao against his removal. Now, in contrast, the accusations against Warren, we sincerely believe, actually originated from, started with the city administrator, Rao, or to present evidence. At the start of this hearing, I made sure Warren was time limited. We never got a chance to present what the evidence shows is the real motivation we believe behind this attempt to have him removed from the hospital. Any hearing in the USA, whether it's a trial for murder or a speeding ticket, or any other type of hearings, it is always relevant evidence to be able to show the motive of the accuser. If there's a hidden motive, a different motive than what is being stated, accused, that's relevant evidence. So we're going to start our presentation tonight this evening. Information, evidence, showing what we believe is the real motive for this wrongful attempt to remove him from the vote. That hidden overarching motive is simply this. Warren Rao refused to lay down to the attempt of Mr. Morales to wrongfully micromanage and exert power in an area where Mr. Morales was not competent. Healthcare finance and administration of a healthcare institution. This in a nutshell is what we believe is the real motive, always relevant. Warren opposed, Mr. Morales attempts. Micromanage our business. First witness we'll call is Warren Robb. Yeah, when you want to give me oath for raise your right hand. Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth. But the truth. I do. Warren, let's start with what you and I consider the first item showing this motive. And that is the ordinance changes on hospital management. Okay. Mr. Morales had proposed even written ordinances where the city mayor and council would have to approve every money expense check for age. Recall that?
I do.
And also ordinance change where the city council would have veto control over the hiring or personnel changes, hiring and firing, at all four of the healthcare businesses, the hospital, the clinic.
Is this one for tonight?
Yeah.
Who knows?
Now, did you oppose those?
I did. The early history on that, the all expense approval by the council actually originated, I would believe back in summer, late fall of, or late summer or fall of 2019, when Ron Running was still chair of the hospital board. And he opposed that very adamantly at that time with the agreement of the existing hospital board.
Now, was that both changes to the ordinance, the personnel control, or just the money signing the checks?
That was, at that time, as I recall, was just the financial end of it, just signing all the checks.
And at that time, besides Ron Ronning as chair, who else was on the hospital board?
At that time, Leslie Ehrenberg was still on, Joanne Lower, myself, and I believe Kevin Shea was on at that time as well.
And at that time, I think you told me that even Dan, mayor, had reservations about that breach, the city having to sign all checks.
That's correct. Dan at that time acknowledged that it was too encumbersome for him. He has a full-time job, didn't want to be expected to be available to sign all those checks at that time, which was certainly reasonable.
So the idea did not originate with Mayor Dan, who did originate?
My assumption would be that Mr. Morales wrote the ordinances. So,
And were you the lone ranger on standing up against these ordinance changes, including one about approving or disapproving personnel changes?
no, I was not. Kevin Shea, Joanne Lower, three of us were on at the time that that part of the ordinance came into play, and we were all opposed to that.
All right, the second item that we believe shows the motive of Mr. Morales to have you removed is, did you repeatedly ask Mr. Morales what Lori Andreas supposedly did wrong by Mr. Morales' conduct for him, which you seem to regard as harassment?
That was an ongoing question and concern, yes.
Did he ever answer?
He did not. His kind of fallback explanation was that state ordinance gave the city council, and through the city council, the administrator, the authority to oversee and basically manage the operations of the facility.
Did you see some of those moves as honest oversight or otherwise?
My view was that I felt he was, for whatever reason, trying to work himself into a position where he had total control of the hospital.
Now, where and when did this happen that you stand up about these changes?
Numerous hospital board meetings we questioned, or not only myself, but others questioned his activities, his motivation. Most noticeably, we had a meeting on December 22nd of 2020 when Mr. Shea asked again what specifically what Lori had done, that he was so opposed to her management of the hospital. And on March, excuse me, I don't know, have the date, but March hospital board meeting, I guess I raised the issue again at that time. That was Lori's last meeting, and I guess I felt that not only herself, but we as a hospital board needed explanation as to what, if anything, she had done wrong, because there was nothing evident to the majority of us on the board, at least. And at that meeting, that was partially virtual, and Mr. Morales was not physically present at the meeting, and I don't recall if he was on video or not at that time.
Could you tell that Mr. Morales was seen to be accusing Lori Andreas of conduct and finances at the hospital, such as stonewalling?
He did. There was an email correspondence between Willie, and originally he sent it to Jake Redepenning, our CFO, requesting information dating back to 2016 even, regarding hospital purchases, income. I don't remember the specifics of what all he was asking for. Things that he proposed were relevant as far as the pandemic and possible grant money availability was concerned, which to me did not seem relevant to the situation at the time. Jake, when he received that information or that request, he transferred it to Lori, which in my opinion is very appropriate, to go to the CEO. And Lori responded to Mr. Morales with a question as to why, excuse me, why he wanted that information. And within an hour of her question to him, he sent a text message or an email. I guess it was not a text message. And Mr. Morales sent an email to all of the council members stating that she was stonewalling, withholding information from him in regards to finances. And after he had sent that email, then I think it was afterwards, he sent an email back to Lori stating that he didn't need a reason. He was a city administrator. And again, going back to state statutes, whatever the number is, he had the authority and approval of the city council to do that.
We have marked as Exhibit 1. And does this provide the email you're talking about, where Mr. Morales gives the verbiage where he's sending it to Jake Redepenning was cut off? Did you actually see the original email that had it there?
I did.
Okay. So I penned in, just for information, that's who sent the email to Jake, right?
Correct.
All right. And what Mr. Morales asked for, he said it was relative COVID impact. In my office needs, but should be needs, but my office needs following information. And he asked for cost of aid, supplies, annual budget, average monthly cost, specific supplies relative to COVID. What percentage of the monthly supply is COVID? I mean, did you feel this was it necessary at all?
I failed to see the relevance at that time.
And did you see this as trying to micromanage and stick too deep into the hospital?
I felt there had to be an ulterior motive of some type. I was not sure what it was at the time.
And at the bottom, we have CEO Lori Andreas at this time responding, saying, Willie, what is the reason for asking for this information? Correct?
Correct.
Good question.
I think it's a question any CEO would be negligent if they didn't ask.
So still part of Exhibit 1 on the second page. within an hour of that email back from Lori, City Administrator Morales got an email to the mayor and the whole city council saying it's regrettable that CEO Jose Andres is resisting critical information that's valuable to him. She's again resisting, using her stonewalling. Did you agree with this?
Absolutely not.
Did that strike you as belligerent and intimidating?
I think that would be a fair statement, yes. If I might add too, there was a return response the next morning, excuse me, from City Attorney Danielle Olson informing Lori that the city was looking at increasing or forming a financial committee to have further oversight and control over the hospital finances.
Do you regard this as proof that Mr. Morales believed that Lori Andrews was doing something wrong?
He was, in my opinion, was trying to plant that seed or that idea in the minds of the city council.
You stood up
I opposed this and tried to draw attention to it. Yes,
at more than one hospital board meeting.
yes.
Now, why did you regard Mr. Morales's attitude, that this belief he seemed to be pursuing, or at least strongly suspecting, of financial wrongdoing with Lori Andreas or the hospital? You regarded that as wrong.
I did.
Why?
In my opinion and the opinion of the, at least majority of the board, there had been no wrongdoing. Lori had come in the time that she was hired, the hospital was hanging on by a thread. They didn't have finances to make payroll, so they had come to the city council and borrowed roughly $1 million, shade over, I believe, if I remember correctly, to make payroll. This was before she actually got hired, excuse me. Anyway, she stepped into that mess and agreed to be our CEO. And during that first year, did an unbelievable job of reconstructing the hospital staff, the hospital finances. Patient numbers were increasing. We operated in the black in the first year of her. Hired new providers, physician's assistants, yes. Added services, added, it may not have been the first year that we added.
In a way of what if there were really some financial shenanigans going on, wouldn't that be detected by some folks?
We have an annual full-scale audit by Ide Bailey was doing it at that time. Currently, we have switched to Whipfleet. But yes, they do a full-scale audit. All the audit reports came back clean. There was no tags of any questionable expenditures or activity at all.
Now, both of these auditing companies, Ide Bailey's national outfit, Whipfleet, their national outfit, they have whole departments that specialize on healthcare institutions and auditing, right?
That's correct.
Is there some financing trick that's going to get by them?
I can't answer that, I guess. I don't know, but
To the best of your knowledge, did Mr. Morales have any education or training in management of healthcare organizations?
not to my knowledge, he did not.
In healthcare finance?
Not that I'm aware of.
Now, another way that this showed up, I'll call antagonism, is was there a distortion or mischaracterization about the Medicare payback to the hospital? Where the hospital had to pay Medicare back, something in the neighborhood of $1 million, a couple of years in that Lori's management.
We did. Their Medicare operates on a cost reimbursement basis. And through the years 2016, 2017, the hospital patient load was declining, thereby income was declining. So our cost per patient was increasing. And that's what Medicare was basing their payments on. 2018, 2019, patient load was increasing. Hospital was doing much better financially and still receiving payments on that reduced patient load. So in effect, we were being overpaid. And that is an annual thing. There's an adjustment between Medicare and any healthcare facility. Some years, if we have a bad year, Medicare pays us more money at the end of the year. If we have a good year, we end up paying Medicare back. The unusual part of it was that it got to be a larger amount than what we were expecting or what we were prepared for. And Lori took ownership of that. She admitted that she should have probably caught that sooner and made quarterly payments on it, which didn't happen. But there was certainly no mishandling of funds, or the only way to avoid doing that, I guess, would be to commit Medicare fraud. And I don't think we want to get into that.
So ultimately, under management, it was all paid back.
It was all paid back.
And did Medicare do anything like ding the hospital or say you did anything wrong?
They did not. And that was mentioned by our auditors as well, that there was nothing unusual about that. It was, the amount perhaps was, but the procedure was not.
Now, did the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, Jake Redmond, and Lori Andreas, in fact, explain this? Not only as you did now, but even in more detail at the city council meeting.
We had a joint city council hospital board meeting shortly after this event. And yes, Jake did a very good job of explaining the procedure that Medicare goes through and how they're basing their reimbursements. And I would have thought to everyone's satisfaction.
This was
One,
spring of 2020.
this would have been, I believe, in the spring of 2020. I think. There was one.
Were you present?
I was. The city council was not fully represented, and one council member did come in after Jake had completed his summary or his presentation, so they didn't catch the gist of his presentation, I don't believe. And since that time, we've got 3 new council members on the city council that were not involved with that. But that's correct. But they came on after that. But I think have heard comments about the hospital and Lori losing that $1 million as a business loss. And I don't feel that those 3 members probably have been educated to fully understand what the situation was behind that. Or how Medicare finances, yes.
Now, I've heard the claim here in the community that Mr. Morales is claiming that he's responsible for the large 7-figure PPP grant loan that the hospital more recently. Is that accurate? I don't know. There's a lot of rumors in this town, but I want to address that. If that's the case, is that?
To my knowledge, it is certainly not accurate. I have had that told to me as well, that he was responsible for a sizable COVID grant. And I find that very hard to believe, I guess.
Are you aware that Jake Redmond and Lori both worked along with other parts of the management on that grant?
Yes. Numerous grants that.
Now, Mr. Morales signed the actual final application.
For the payroll protection plan, yes, that was considered, at the time it was granted, was considered a loan. And being that the city owns the hospital, Mr. Morales had to sign as a loan, as a borrower, I guess I should say.
I want to talk again about Whipfleet, that's W-I-P-F-L-I, I assume it's an acronym for this healthcare consulting auditing firm, correct?
They are an audit firm and yes, the medical or healthcare advisory service.
At some point, did you hear that Mr. Morales was proposing adding a second city council person instead of just a regular citizen on the hospital?
Yes, I did.
Did you oppose that?
I did.
Why?
I felt that by adding more city council members on there, it was enabling, in this case, Mr. Morales to have more affirmative control over events at the hospital, thereby making it into more of a political business than a freestanding hospital.
Were you aware that Mr. Morales claimed that an official with in fact, a consultant from Whipfleet that was the closest advisor to the hospital, that consultant claimed that he told Mr. Morales that there should be more involvement by the city council on the hospital, that more was needed, and they should add another city council member to the hospital. And Mr. Morales claimed that the consultant claimed him, right?
And he did, yes. He also added that it was in an effort to improve relationships between the city council and the hospital board.
And were you aware that Lori Andreas, the CEO at the time, followed up on this?
I became aware of that, yes.
And did that Whipfleet consultant deny Mr. Morales?
He did. He stated that he had actually suggested that the hospital should have more anonymity, freedom to operate aside or outside the city council.
Showing you exhibit 2 is this starts with an email from Lori Andreas, correct? To Nicholas Smith, that's the fellow from Whipfleet.
It is, yeah.
Well, not everybody here reads the corner. Ms. Andreas asked Mr. Whipfleet or Mr. Smith, consultant, hello, Nick, as you know, we have a very strained relationship with the city administration. Most recently, the city council voted to add one more council member to the hospital board, so the mayor and councilman made up 2/5 of the hospital board. The city manager has stated that you told him that more involvement from the city council was needed. That is why they are adding another council member. The board member asked me
To clarify.
to clarify this. And Mr. Smith got back that same day, in 15 minutes, looks like, saying, Lori, I'm sorry to hear about this. I don't recall giving any advice like that. I mostly listened. But in fact, you remember telling the city manager that, in my opinion, I thought it was unusual for a municipality to have much any involvement in the day-to-day operations management of the hospital. The council then would give you autonomy to continue making the progress you and the leadership team have been making. I also said that typical municipal involvement would mainly include providing support as the time comes for major capital projects as they are needed to reinvest in the facility. I'm happy to chat further. In fact, the city government did step up and make good money investments for the city when they really needed.
They did. They loaned us $1 million. Which has since been paid back, by the way.
Now, you supported Lori Andreas when she was CEO, getting a raise in her income, right, her salary.
I did.
And that was what, after the first year, or when was that?
I believe it was after her first year, she got a significant raise. When Lori came in and interviewed for the position, and we offered the position to her, we informed her that we didn't have any money, which she was already aware of, knew we were broke. And yet she did agree to take the position and at a reduced salary, which we were very upfront about. We said that we, couldn't afford to pay a quote unquote going rate. So she accepted the position, and we assured her that if things improved, that we would try to get her up to a competitive, comparable rate for the area. And after the first year, obviously she made remarkable progress in turning the facility around. And we did offer a new contract that still was not up to the competition in the surrounding area, but it was much closer. And she accepted that.
And were you aware that this increase in salary, despite the circumstances you described, that aggravated, put it mildly, Mr. Brown?
I became aware of that, yes. He had conversations with Lori in regards to her salary increase. And at the time, the city council did not have an opportunity to approve or disapprove of it. Those ordinances had not been passed yet. And in frustration, he talked to Lori, and his parting comment was, and excuse my language, but you'll get your fucking raise.
Now, you also, as a board member, criticized, well, at least questioned the large public money spent with having to find a new CEO for the hospital after Lori left.
I was not happy about that, yes, no.
Now, also, the last and fifth item concerning motive by Mr. Morales, or showing motive in animosity toward you. Did Mr. Morales ever provide you with a decent, much less a legal notice of them trying to remove you from the board?
The only notice that I have gotten was a phone call on a Wednesday morning following our April hospital board meeting. No listing of charges, just that there was going to be a public hearing on the following Monday afternoon at 2 o'clock, which I thought kind of odd, that middle of a work day during the week like that timing was kind of strange, but the more I thought about it, I guess I viewed it as being a deliberate attempt to limit the amount of public observation or public involvement.
So it was less than a week of notice and not even written at that.
Correct.
And I think you first saw a listing, your wife happened to get it off of the website.
She happened to see it on Facebook and then went into the city website and did find a listing of the letter with a list of charges.
All right, we're going to review a couple of the other accusations that you may have touched on in the last meeting, but didn't fully flesh out the response. But as far as showing the motive, true motive behind Mr. Morales' move, I think that completes our evidence. But I want you to testify and give evidence on another accusation that you interrupted and rejected legal advice by the city attorney. Did you ever recall doing that?
I don't think it was fully or what I would consider legal advice. I guess it was suggested that I quit presenting information that I was trying to present regarding Willie and his behavior, that I felt both Dan and Gary at one meeting at least, I felt Gary was not aware of what some of the instances that had taken place. And I felt that as a hospital
board meeting?
This was at a hospital board meeting. Yes. One was in March. Yes. There was one earlier.
And you started reading off a newspaper article from Northfield, Massachusetts concerning Mr. Morales and his prior employment there?
That was part of what I wanted to present. Yes.
Okay, and when you started doing that, first, there's also the city attorney interrupted you and said you shouldn't be doing that or stop doing that.
Correct.
Anyway, she might have told you to stop.
Correct.
Did you understand that to be legal advice or why she was doing that?
I could not see any reason to consider it legal advice, I guess.
This
I wasn't-
was reading off of a public newspaper article that's already out in the public.
Correct.
And you proceeded to try to read snippets from it, and then the board chair, not the board chair again, got you.
That's correct. And the reason I wanted to read it, it showed a pattern of behavior by Mr. Morales from his former place of employment. And I guess I would still like to read a couple of the sentences on there if I could.
Well, generally, I think you told me that in your view, the full article and snippets show the inability to work with others and manage.
That was one comment that was made in there. And
Specifically in that case, it was the police department.
correct. Mr. Morales was in a hearing, same position that I am in tonight.
Yeah, if you want, if there's a particular case snippet that you think is.
Well, the first one you pretty well stated already. It was dealing with his involvement with the chief of police there and some hiring practices and so on. But after the hearing, and I quote here, after the hearing in which complaints of poor communication and inappropriate actions showed a lack of confidence in the administrator, and the selectman placed a written warning in Mr. Morales's personnel file. And the other thing that struck me as a carbon copy of to what we were going through or have been going through, and I quote again, is stated later in the article, more than once the discussion returned to the evidently ongoing issues of mistrust and miscommunication between Morales and other town employees. And that pretty well hit the nail on the head as far as I was concerned as to what we've been experiencing.
Now, did you in fact elect the city council?
No, I did not. I did show that, or I guess that was my attempt on the would have been March meeting that I was attempting to
Well, back
present
at
it
the
to.
beginning of this hearing, on May 3rd, you submitted some written material.
It was part of that, yes, part of that
We
packet.
marked that as before.
Okay.
All right, another accusation was that you were harassing the city administrator or creating a hostile environment for city employees. Do you believe you did either?
I probably made Mr. Morales uncomfortable with some of the questions and positions that I took opposing his activities. Other city employees, I certainly do not agree with, no.
Even with Mr. Morales, did you regard that as unfair harassment?
I did not.
Now, there's another accusation that you were disruptive at the board meeting where the interviews of the interim CEO candidates for the hospital were taking place, and that you objected to the process, but that all the other management of the hospital who was there and other people there did not object and found it fair. Do you recall that accusation?
I do. It actually took place after the candidate interviews. It was at our next hospital board meeting. Actually, unfortunately, the first meeting that the new interim CEO was at. But I
Explain what you, well, first of all, explain your side.
I wasn't opposed so much to the procedure that was followed. I was opposed to the fact that Willie took over the organization and setup of it. At, I believe it was our February meeting, the hospital board approved that our human resource person, Kim Oxendorf, would lead the committee that selected and worked with a recruitment firm, in this case, B.E. Smith, who we chose. And when it came to the interview, came to find out afterwards that Mr. Morales and the board, hospital board chair, Corey Thorsland, basically did the total organization, set everything up. Willie prepared the questions that were going to be asked of the candidates. and distributed them to, there was, I think, a total of, must have been, what was it, 26 people here the day that we interviewed the candidates. And everyone, or 20 people of that 26 were assigned questions that they were to ask or are able to ask of the candidate. My opposition was, I guess I was hoping and wanted to see more involvement and opportunity from the hospital staff to submit questions that they could ask or that could be asked. They didn't have to ask them themselves even, but an opportunity to ask questions that were pertinent to them. And they were not given that opportunity. And that was my main objection.
Who wrote the candidate?
Mr. Morales.
Now, as far as selecting or whittling down candidates, who selected then the two finalists that came for the interviews?
Excuse me, for the position that we interviewed, my understanding is that there were only 2 applicants for an interim position.
Another accusation that you and I both read was that you both continued to push your personal agenda. And that's subverted the will of the hospital.
I remember reading that, yes. I do not.
Or do you know that you ever carried out some personal agenda in your work or advocacy for the hospital?
If I have had a personal agenda, it's one that I arrived at recently, and then that was to try to get the city administrator removed from the hospital or any involvement with the hospital. In my opinion, that is what's been creating the disruption and the uncertainty amongst staff and management.
Exhibits 1, 2, and 4, and that completes our direct exam with Mr. Rao. We're ready to call one other witness. You want to question Mr. Rao?
Time out, as you might can.
Opposite of the ones at the courthouse. In the discussion about the proper notice, is it your claim today that you don't have proper notice as of June 10th, 2021 for the mayor's letter that was submitted on May 3rd?
I have not gotten any notice other than a phone call from Mr. Morales. That's the only notification that I have gotten.
So have you had a chance to read the mayor's letter dated May 3rd, 2021?
Through my own research, I did find it, and I have had a chance to read it, yes.
In its entirety, have you read it?
Yes.
And the 6 factors that the mayor cited to as being as to the cause of the request for removal, have you looked at those?
There was, I believe, 6 items listed, yes.
Okay. And so is it your position today that we, by continuing this to June 10th, 2021, have not provided you proper notice?
I don't know what the legality is, I guess, but in my opinion, if I'm being officially charged with something, I would get an official letter notification of those charges delivered to me or mailed to me at least. And I did not get that.
If I were to tell you that the notice that you've received and you have read it is proper notice, would you agree or disagree? Today you have been allowed the time to present in response to those.
Sounds like a legal question, and I'm not real sure I have a position to give a legal answer. It was very unprofessional in my opinion. Is it a legal notice? I guess I found the letter, I read it, so I suppose that's considered a legal notice. But it was in my opinion, at least, a very unprofessional and inappropriate way of dealing with it.
Now, when it comes to requesting financial records or any records with respect to a public hospital, are you aware of what the data practices rules are?
Not specifically, no.
Okay. And so I know in your opinion, you're taking offense to Mr. Morales asking for records dating currently all the way back to 2017. Is that a fair statement?
2016. Yes.
16? And you understand with a public entity such as the public hospital, the data practices request a 10-day turnaround. If anybody, regardless if it's city administrator, the council, anybody from the public can ask for records, specifically financial records for an institution such as this one, and we have 10 days to respond.
I realize it's a government-owned facility, so there are no hidden records, so to speak, or whatever. Yes.
Now, it's my understanding you were concerned about a financial committee being established. It's my understanding that the hospital bylaws have been recently updated. Is that correct?
The hospital bylaws have been updated to match the city ordinances.
Okay.
That was not necessarily done willingly, but for simplicity's sake, since the city writes the rules, so to speak. However, in regards to that as well, the city approved the original hospital bylaws and got lost for words here. Anyway, the hospital, how should I put this? The city changed the ordinances numerous times without giving any consideration to the existing hospital bylaws that they had previously approved. And I guess I question that isn't a proper means of handling changing of bylaws.
And would you agree or disagree? That's probably one of the disagreements that me and you've had, is the understanding of the statute then allows for the ordinance then allows for the bylaws. The bylaws do not control the statute and ordinances. Would that be a fair statement?
If you say it is, I guess it is.
No, part of the bylaws, and as far back as I can tell, they've always established committees. And are you aware of the current committees? For example, it allows for an executive committee. Do you currently have one as the hospital board?
Excuse me? What?
Executive committee?
Yeah, the three chairman, vice chair, and secretary treasurer.
And that makes up your executive committee?
That would be the executive committee, yes.
And do you have a trustee committee right now?
We have those offices, I guess. I'm not real clear what you're asking for. Yeah.
I was just trying to figure out if there was a financial committee that was separated.
Oh,
from-
I'm sorry. No, there is not a specific financial committee.
Now, we talked before about legal advice. So every year I give the typical annual, here's the open meeting law. These are the requirements for closed meeting laws. And as you're aware, as the chairman, we would go into numerous closed sessions. Is that a fair statement?
Repeat that again, please.
Yep.
Something about your voice. I just have a hard time.
Yep, sorry. As the chair of the hospital board, do you remember why we would go into closed meetings?
Do I remember?
Why? For what purpose?
Do I remember why
Why we would go into closed meetings? And closed sessions?
Well, their closed meetings are conducted if it pertains to a work person's misconduct, or in most salary negotiations are conducted in closed meetings.
Correct. So any public employee, or example of the hospital or of the city, so when we are dealing with disciplinary issues or reviews, that requires a closed session, correct?
That would be my understanding, I guess, yes.
Okay. And so in discussion of when I indicated to you that you needed to stop talking, as my concern was the hospital was going to open its door for liability, at that point, is it a fair statement you're requesting removal and public discipline of the city administrator?
I was not requesting his removal. I was just furnishing information that was already public knowledge.
Do you understand the city's concern of attempting to publicly discipline an employee?
I was also not in a position to publicly discipline him, or anyone else for that matter.
Hence disagreeing with my legal advice.
Okay.
Now, you indicated that Mr. Thorsland and Mr. Morales were essentially organizing the process for the hiring of the interim. Is that correct?
That's correct. My understanding, at least, yes.
Okay. And as the hospital chair, Mr. Thorsland, wouldn't you believe that was his duty and job to do?
He was in a position to do that. I don't know that it was any more his position than anyone else on the board. The statute states that the city council will approve a CEO as recommended by the hospital board. So that, to me, that entitles the entire board to have access to any preparation and information pertaining to those candidates.
Now, when you say statute, are you referring to the Minnesota statutes and which statute?
The city statute,
Okay, those are
city ordinances, excuse me, I'm sorry.
And again, would it be a fair statement you have disagreed with the ordinance changes that have allowed more oversight?
I disagree with, yes, I do.
And actually, the city attorney, me, advised the city hospital, since you guys may have differing interests, to hire an outside counsel, which the city hospital did. Is that correct?
I believe that's so, yes.
And they rendered an opinion with respect to the city ordinances. Is that also correct?
I believe so.
And again, there was nothing incorrect about the ordinances, and based on the recommendation of your outside counsel, again, had additional questions and added some information to those ordinances, which were adopted as well.
The outside recommendations from the outside attorney, as to my understanding, she disagreed with them strongly, but felt that it would be a difficult battle to legally oppose them due to state statute.
Now, previously at the May 3rd hearing, give me one moment. You had started and went down the line of Mayor Tassel's letter, and specifically was starting with one, you had admitted that you had requested the mayor to resign.
In a personal discussion with him, I asked if he would consider it because I felt there's a conflict of interest between being the mayor with a personal agenda and trying to adequately and fairly serve the hospital board. Yes.
And do you understand there is no legal conflict with the two entities, and he's able to hold that position?
Perhaps not a legal conflict, but I think there is definitely a personal conflict there.
Okay. And again, at the May 3rd, 2021 meeting, you acknowledged that you did not turn over the complaint to Human Resources or the CEO regarding a photo, an alleged complaint.
I'm going to have to ask you to repeat that again,
Yeah.
please.
And at the May 3rd meeting,
Yes.
that you responded back to the complaint that you hadn't turned over to Human Resources or the CEO for a complaint against a hospital employee, specifically a photograph.
Yeah, in regards to that, what?
Yes. Did you take it upon yourself to respond back to that individual? Had that passed that to you?
I did, to the extent I asked if there were some specifics that could be included with that. Yes.
And it's my understanding that you indicated there was nothing that could be done at that time to that person.
I know.
And do you understand the proper channels that when a complaint comes in, there is attorney involvement, a CEO involvement in order to ensure and protect the city hospital as well as the city itself?
There is a procedure of bringing that to the whole board and the administrator.
And again, you did admit that you had indicated at the May 3rd hearing, you did tell Mr. Morales that you did not trust him.
I don't know if that was what, 2 years ago, that meeting. I made the statement more flippantly than, because we were talking about trust between the council and the hospital board. Ron Running was chairman of the hospital board at that time, and that was the very beginning of these ordinance changes regarding the finances and so on. And Ron was pushing the issue that, the council had to have some trust in the hospital board. We're all people that have been here a long time, are well known to each other. And I made the comment to Willie that I said, I can't trust you. I said, I don't know you well enough to trust you. So yes, in that respect, I did make that comment.
And do you think that would help engage a relationship between the city and the hospital with a comment of that nature?
If it was taken out of context, it certainly would not.
Now, with respect to, we already addressed the city attorney advice, with respect to publishing opinions on the behalf of the hospital board by not representing the will. It's my understanding there's a publication in the January 13th, 2021, a letter to the editor signed by you, which at that time would have been the chair of the board, correct?
Correct.
All right. And I believe when Mr. Borstead came on in February, that first meeting, he had requested and asked you if you had received approval to publish that by a vote of the board.
He asked that, yes.
And do you remember what you indicated to him?
I said I had not brought it up at a hospital board meeting. I don't recall that, for one thing, timing wise, I don't think we had a board meeting after the mayor's letter came out in the paper. And I felt that the tone of that letter required a response. In my opinion, the tone of the mayor's letter made the hospital board look like a bunch of wildcats that were preparing to build a hospital, basically run totally uncontrolled, for lack of a better term, probably. And I felt that there were other comments in there, one pertaining to the ordinances, which at the time, the ordinance that had been passed and was in existence allowed for the city council's hiring and firing and compensation rates for all hospital staff members. Now, as I recall, Gary asked or made the comment that was in the process of being changed, which it may or may not have been, I guess. At the time, the hospital or the city ordinances were changing rather quickly. And at the time, my letter was accurate. So I guess I don't feel that I made any misstatements in that letter.
Do you remember that?
You asked about having it approved. I had showed the letter to two of the hospital board members individually, and they both were in agreement with it. So in effect, it was approved by the majority of the hospital board. And the letter was not written as representative of the hospital board. It was my personal views, and the letter was written in that perspective.
And do you understand the city attorney's concern that that violates open meeting law when you indicate you contacted quorum of the hospital board to approve a letter that goes into the paper?
There was not a quorum. They were contacted individually.
Do you know what a quorum of your current hospital board is?
3.
And you indicated at that meeting you spoke to Joanne and to Kevin. And got their
Individually.
approval, correct?
Pardon?
And you got their approval to submit the letter?
Individually, yes.
Now, with respect to the date of that, you were informed and had the knowledge and information that that was never the city's intent to have the hiring and firing over the employees. And in fact, language had been sent an email by the CEO to all of the board members, including you, in December indicating that would be changed at the next meeting, which was in January.
Proposal was there to change it, yes, or was going to be presented to change it.
And did you have any concern as to eliciting some heightened concern by the employees by not helping calm the waters, indicating that that was not the intent of the city?
Well, there was a lot of events taking place that were creating uncertainty and concerns amongst the employees. And I don't think that that letter contributed to that concern or that concern, I guess I'll go with.
Do you think it would have helped ease the concern of the employees to know that you had viewed and seen the proposed ordinance change to ensure that it's still the hospital board's job to employ all the employees with the exception of the CEO?
Again, I'll say it was a proposal that hadn't passed yet. And I guess at that point, I don't feel that anything was certain as to how that was going to be handled.
Okay. Now, it's my understanding at the April 27th April 27th hospital board meeting. Previously, at the interim hiring. Do you remember how many hospital employees were there?
I think a total of 26 was mentioned now, and not, I'm assuming that included the hospital board, so I would say possibly 20.
And you were at the table as well.
I was.
And you also have seen the minutes at the hospital board meeting, as well as the letter recommending the hiring of the interim CEO. Is that a fair statement?
I had not seen a letter. I guess we voted after the interviews to approve offering the position to Emmett Schuster.
And later at the 27th meeting, you indicated that essentially the city hospital is not part of that process.
Say again, please.
That the city hospital is not part of the hiring process, and that was your concern?
Oh, the human resource individual that had been approved to head the committee and I think that was at our February meeting, was not actively involved in the preparation of the questions, or I'm not sure that she was involved with the selection of the individuals or invitation of the individuals who attended here on as far as the hospital staff. The disappointment that I had was, I guess, that Mr. Morales totally disregarded the fact that we have a human resource person who that is her specialty, handling the recruitment and hiring of employees.
Didn't you previously indicate there was only 2 that had applied?
That's, to my knowledge, that was the only 2 that applied, yes.
So it's not necessarily a fair statement to say HR didn't get to choose the 2 that were interviewed.
No, not in selecting the individual candidates, but in the questioning process is what I'm opposed or was opposed to.
And at that April 27th meeting, it's my understanding Ms. Oxendorf actually stood up and spoke as to what her role was, correct?
She said that she was shown, the questions before the interview was to take place, yes.
And that her and Mr. Redepenning and Mr. Thorson did edit some of those questions?
My understanding is that they edited one, yes.
And so again, is it your position they didn't have a say in any of the questions?
Excuse me again?
Are you still taking the position they didn't have any say in the questions?
What I'm opposed to is the fact that the hospital staff didn't have any input into creating the questions. They have concerns that they were not permitted to have addressed to the candidates. That was my opposition.
And during that interview process, there was a blank for a question that any question could be asked, which made the city attorney a little nervous.
There was for one candidate,
Yes.
yes. One took up the full hour and didn't get through all 20 questions.
Yes.
And I think it was the second candidate, there was time and the offer was made. If anyone had a question at that time, yes, there was offer made that they could ask it.
And wouldn't that be an opportunity for any of the audience, which was the hospital, to ask any question that they wanted to at that time?
It was an opportunity, but I guess that for comparison, if I may, if I asked you what you're going to do tomorrow afternoon at 2:00 and give me an answer, you'd probably like an opportunity to think about it and prepare your question or your response before you were asked to give it. And I guess that's the view that I take, that they were here, they had been given questions they were supposed to ask. All of a sudden, you've got 3 minutes left. Has anybody got a question? To me, it was not surprising that no one jumped up and said, yes, I have one.
Would you agree that your hospital board chair, Mr. Thorson, approved of those questions?
I am aware of that, yes.
Is it still your request today that Mr. Morales is not part of any of the knowledge information with the finances with respect to the hospital?
I apologize, but I just, your voice just does not carry for me.
Certainly, I can rephrase that too. You indicated that you wanted Mr. Morales to be removed from anything to do with the hospital, the finances, any of that information.
I don't feel that he is a good representative of the city in dealing with the hospital in any fashion. I don't feel that he has a personality that he can work with people. And I think that is evidenced by some of the other situations that have taken place within the city. And I guess that is my concern. His behavior has created a great deal of unrest and turmoil within the staff and management of the hospital. And I feel that the more involved that he gets, I think it's going to have an adverse effect on the future of the hospital.
So as a city-owned hospital, which is interrelated to the finances of the city itself, how do you propose going forward with the city administration that needs to know what the finances are?
I have no objection to his knowing what's going on. Former administrator Lori Andreas was giving it for quite a good share of her tenure here, monthly financial reports, as well as along with Jake Redepenning would come to a council meeting and give financial reports. But I would expect that they would be treated with respect and the appropriate manners that someone in their position should have, and they were not getting that.
Which raises the question of when the request for financial information comes in and you just agreed that it should have went to Mr. Morales, how in the future does that relationship look?
The relationship between,
The city administration and the financials at the Appleton Hospital?
how it should work. I guess I'm kind of at a loss. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking me here.
Well, as a board member, would you indicate back to the hospital that they don't have to release that information? Or what would be your position?
It's all public information. And I say I'm not opposed to sharing of the information, but I am opposed to the treatment and the method that he got it. When Willie sent that text message asking for information, detailed information going back to 2016 as being COVID related, which I find very highly skeptical, or I'm skeptical about. But when our hospital administrator asks for what purpose he needs the information and gets a response that I don't need a reason. By state statute so-and-so, I am entitled to get that information. Any CEO that would not ask for a reason for releasing information, it's a fair question, and it deserves a respectable and a fair answer.
Do you foresee your ability to work with the council and with the hospital administrator in the future? Well, it's my understanding you indicated you don't want the city administrator and you sought his removal.
I think it would be appropriate. Yes, I think he has created enough inappropriate or done enough inappropriate actions and created enough turmoil that I think it should be evident that he is doing more harm to this city than good.
And are you able to set that opinion aside for him to have a working relationship with him?
I speak for myself, I guess. I'm willing to try to have a working relationship with him if he, quote unquote, can behave himself and behave properly for someone in his position. And he has not proven that. And by the newspaper article that I read, that is a pattern of behavior on his part.
Just double checking it, but I believe I am finished. Nothing further.
We hopefully spend very little time on this, but this business about you didn't turn over a photograph of your can sitting in a car in the parking lot of the hospital. And somebody sent that to you anonymously?
It was an anonymous email that I know I received, and I know Dan received it as well. If I recall right, I think it was on a Friday that it came.
Did you turn around and email back and say, who is this or something more?
Over the weekend, I sent a response to the email. I asked if you could give me any specifics, places, names, anything that we had to go on, because it was on the street. I couldn't see what, I'm assuming it was an alcohol or a can of alcohol on the hood of a car. And the accusation was that people were drinking on the job. Well,
Was that stated or was that? just-
that was stated in the text message or the email. And anyway, I did not do anything with it on Friday.
Did you get a response after you required from work?
I got a duplicate email,
Sent to you, saying,
same thing, yeah. And either Monday or Tuesday, I happened to be working ambulance, and then I went up to the hospital, and Lori had already gotten, I think, Danielle, I think, had sent her a copy of the video.
So on Monday, you went to tell Lori about it. And, you know,
Monday or Tuesday, I'm not sure which day it was that I was in. But anyway, it was, yes.
So for 2 or 3 days, there was an interim where you did get it to Lori, this photo of a beer can with maybe some misconduct, you don't know who. That's the infraction.
Yeah, apparently.
We'll call Kevin Shea. The answer. Sir, tell the truth, nothing but the truth. So, yeah.
Yes.
Dr. Shea, you're a well-known retired doctor of dentistry here in the Appleton community.
Yep.
I think you'd be more comfortable if I called you Kevin.
Either way.
Do you recall instances where we're around at hospital board meetings, as a hospital board member like you, question why city administrator Ms. Morales seemed antagonistic, opposed to Lori Andrews?
Yes, a few times.
Did that eventually lead to you making the same type of inquiry directly to Mr. Morales at a hospital board meeting?
Yes, it did happen in the December 22nd meeting.
Could you please explain for the council, in case they weren't there? Tell us the relevant part of that board meeting where you asked, what did you ask for Mr. Morales?
The normal agenda had been gone through, and Lori Andreas had given her letter of resignation that she would retire or be leaving in June. And, just part of my view or question was sort of why had things been, not stated for what she had done wrong. So I asked him if we could know that, what she had done wrong. He felt it was sort of, let's see, how did he state it? I had written something down like that here. Yeah, he said, it was my personal assumption anyway, that he was questioning her ability, mine now, and making her feel like she was not doing an acceptable job. And when I asked Mr. Morales what he had against and I had used the word female CEO, Lori, this was not a statement about gender, but why he was against her as CEO of the Appleton Hospital Board. Wanting to know, so when we had to look forward, what should be done differently, was vague. And to the best of my words I can remember, he stated it was an insult why I asked him this question. And he never did answer that question. So then the subjects got changed, and
Did he seem emotionally upset?
yeah, he did. Yeah.
Anything else relevant at that meeting on that point?
There was more discussion. There were several of the primary team of the hospital there, and the manager of the nursing home and Apple Ridge did speak up and asked, they, why do you act that way? Yeah, he was asking Mr. Morales why he acted that way with anger and sort of being furious, and just to answer the question. And then I don't think it really got answered then either. So yes, another member did speak up into that.
So it was real clear to you that there was real antagonism when he was asked to explain why he was going at Lori Andreas, or why he had done all these things that could be antagonistic.
Yeah, it did.
And after that, was there an email that you saw from City Administrator, Mr. Morales?
Yeah, the next morning I had an email from my email account that I used for the hospital things.
Three up on here. And is this the first page of that email by Mr. Morales? To Mayor Council and the City Council members.
Yeah, I think that's one, December 22nd. Yeah. Yes, that's it.
And he accused you of attacking him, correct?
In that letter, yes.
And he said there's been plenty of vitriol or harsh words from the hospital board. And then on the second page, he accused you of yelling at him, accusing you of bias.
That's what he said.
And you put quite a bit more verbiage in there, and you demanded that Mr. Shea must reconcile and apologize in writing to be submitted by the City Council.
Yeah.
And further, that he felt it was such a degree that he was mentally anguished and needed to take sick leave.
Yeah, that's what the email says.
You know, plenty of folks would find that humorous, but it's something to be accused of being biased about someone's sexuality or their race.
Yeah.
Do you appreciate that?
No,
Did you provide an apology to him?
I did not.
Why not?
I didn't feel I had done anything wrong that was warranted. I did not try to say anything biased. And I felt I was representing the hospital board to the best of my ability. And the duty of a hospital board member would be to respect the fellow workers that I was partaking with.
And the gist of what you were doing was asking him to explain his antagonism to your just recently resigned CEO, Lori Andrews.
Exactly.
Did he ever answer?
I have never heard an answer yet.
Thank you.
Good.
That completes our evidence. Well, I don't know what's left of the hearing. I have some information remarks here, but maybe you two or maybe the witnesses.
No, we do not. So just whatever your presentation was.
Information you want to give?
You can go for it. Yes. Yes.
Obviously, I'm here to ask you to consider what form around state on the hospital board. When this business came up, started developing, couldn't help but think of my partner Dan, who worked as a district manager for Midland Co-ops for decades. He'd go all over western Minnesota, eastern Dakotas, and what he did is he helped co-op elevator boards set up fertilizer farms. Loved the work. Couldn't farm anymore, so he loved that work. And he used to tell me to the point where I got sick of hearing it. 3 types of boards, Brian, 3 types of boards. And not surprised when I got to the city attorney and watched the attorneys, I watched county boards, I watched school boards in our area. What he told me was accurate. There's a pattern. Boards kind of fall into 3 categories. The first kind is the best. You have a set of people who are mindful, willing to talk, willing to question, willing to argue, even repeatedly sometimes, for the good of that institution, make the right decision come out of it. Second kind of board is a single dominant person really runs it. You probably think in your head, you've seen that too. And that person really calls the shots. Everybody doesn't have the verb and they fall into place. There's a real danger to that kind of board, because if that person, big shot, strong, wrong, or misled, or takes the wrong path, or has got something fraudulent, you can wreck the institution. But then there's the third kind of board, and Floyd and I consider that the worst. That is the real strong man is hidden behind the scenes. Not even a member of the board or council. And that person is so dangerous because he can't be unliked. And he doesn't work silently. And, you know, Floyd's experience, it could be a particular really big farmer in the area, it could have been a big banker. He saw it. And it was hard to see. And a common operating board, common operating method of this hidden hand of power. It's clever. It'd be, they'll sit down, they'll work with one-on-one with board members, and they'll tell them secret inside information. This is what's going on. I know, and here's why. Not unusual to have a 7 documents to sit down and say, look at this, this is bad. And convince them that there's shenanigans going on. And there's something really inviting, really tantalizing about that. You know, when you're inside the team, you know information about it. It's really tantalizing. And the real danger of this is that you can ignore audits that say otherwise. You can ignore and put aside other information. And worse yet, if in fact there is bad conduct going on, that should be fully investigated in the open. That board or council should be hired investigators or consultants or both, perhaps at closed meetings if you are a government board, because it involves personnel. It's duty to dig into it, okay? But if a person's lulled on the inside that, well, this is just, we know the truth. Bad things can happen. People can lose their jobs. Good institution can go downhill. Wrong people are attacked. Now, if we stop and think for a moment, just take a half-mile view up on our little town. Who is responsible It's political, social, legal. Who's responsible for city employees leaving their jobs? Volunteers in town quitting for volunteer work that they have. Not going around. I'm going to circle back to the boards business, the technical boards. One of the best history books I've ever read is by a woman named Doris Kearns Goodwin. Team of Rivals. Recommended to you. Big components. But it's really good. And it's about President Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. And when Lincoln first got into office, he was looked on by a large part of the American people, especially East Coast powers and intellectuals as lone country here. And my God, he's proved this way. But look what he did is he appointed his rivals, some of his most bitter enemies, politically. He put them in his cabinet. Idiot. But he knew what they did. And history proved it right. Because by having people who you disagree with, by having people who are willing to get in your face and argue, if you have different points of view, better conduct comes up. If you're open to that, it comes out. The team of rivals works. He made his story. He was listening to some of his worst critics. So, last thing anybody needs, our town, is boards or councils. Cabinets of yes. Warren Rouse case, he's a valuable piece for this community. I mean, boards are appointed in sequence. Why? If you want continuity, you don't want a brand new fresh board. Because there can be all sorts of ignorance as far as what is going on. I don't mean ignorance of stupidity. I mean unknown. You don't know battles that happen, controversies or mistakes that can be made if you start with all of a fresh board. So that's why you stagger and have different boards and different appointments. Awesome. I'm sitting with quite a few. But so there's value in Warren having been on the board. But on top of that, he's went through and watched it go down, not even down, even after that, but watched it get built back up. He's been in the healthcare himself as far as a long time volunteer. That's a valuable piece on the hospital. So I respectfully request that you think it really good and step back and go. You can take this deep. Here, but community needs someone that may be.
Make a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion has been made. Do I have a second? Motion's been made and seconded to close the hearing. Will there be any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries. Old business.
A resolution for immediate removal of Warren Rall from the hospital and nursing home board. Whereas the mayor pursuant to Article 3166 of the Appleton City Code has the authority to remove any board member of the mayor and consent of the council for cause after a hearing. Whereas the city initially held a hearing May 3rd pursuant Article 31.66 of the Appleton City Code within Mr. Rao presented responses and admissions to the mayor statements and correspondence. Whereas the city motion and granted the request for additional time at the continued hearing on June 10th. And whereas the city finds the following actions justify removal of Warren Rowell from the hospital and nursing home board for cause. Number one, per his admission, Mr. Rowell requested the mayor resign from the hospital board, and the city finds the request as without justification. Mr. Rowell, could you? Sure. Mr. Rowell continues to cite conflict, but there is no legal conflict. Per his admission, Mr. Rowell did not turn over the complaint to Human Resources or the CEO, which the city finds creates an exposure to the city and hospital for legal liability. For his admission, Mr. Rowell told the city administrator he did not trust the city administrator at the hospital board's meeting, which the city finds creates an unreceptacle work environment. The interpretation and rejection of the city's attorney's legal advice specifically attempts to cause public discipline of city employees in disregard regarding ordinances and open meeting law violation requirements. Publishing opinions on behalf of the hospital that were not representative of the voted will of the hospital board. Misrepresenting the will of the hospital board at an April 27th hospital board meeting.
Just so I'm clear, is that a motion to remove Mr. Warren Rowell and adoption of the resolution that you just read?
That is correct.
The motion on the floor, do we have a second? Motion has been made and seconded. Will there be any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll second.
Motion has been made and seconded to adjourn. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.